Hey everyone, I'm Carlianne, and today I'm going to be answering the question of what products you actually need if you're going to be creating digital art. As a background, I've been doing digital art for a long time, but professionally for 10 years, so do some extra math on your own. And I personally use two setups, one that I think is really great for beginners that I'm going to recommend, and then also a secondary setup that I would recommend for professionals. So I'll talk about both of those setups. I'll try to give you cheaper options whenever I can, but I'm going to be mostly recommending the items that I personally use. And then I'm also going to talk about when it's time when you might consider getting the more professional gear and what that looks like. And I'm also going to talk about the pros and cons of both of those setups. All right, so in order to be able to use digital art, you're going to need at least 3 to 4 things. You're going to need a computer or a tablet. You're going to need something to draw on if your computer or tablet doesn't allow that. You're going to need a drawing program like Procreate or Photoshop, and you're going to need some sort of pen that allows you to have pressure sensitivity. So when you press down on the screen, like your line can get thicker or thinner or more opaque or transparent, those sort of things. That's really important if you're going to be drawing. All right, so let's say you're a beginner. You don't have to go out and buy a tablet if that is not going to work for you budget friendly wise. You can get tablets that connect to a computer and do it on either a PC or a Mac. In my experience, it really doesn't matter which one you go with in regards to that. However, I really enjoy using a tablet, and I really do recommend it for beginners because some of the pros of having a tablet are things like you can do it from anywhere. You can draw anywhere you want. It's sort of like a portable sketchbook. And also, it's a much cheaper way to get the experience of drawing directly on the screen. When you're using a computer, if you want that set up, it's going to be much more expensive to get a tablet that you can draw directly on the painting itself. So I still think it's cheaper and a better option to go with a tablet when you're a beginner and have that flexibility. Some tablets that you can get, the iPad Pro is the most recommended in my experience for drawing digitally because of Procreate. Procreate is a wonderful program for drawing with, and it's used by professionals. There's even children's books that were illustrated completely in Procreate. So it's getting to that level where it's almost professional quality, and a lot of the things you can do in Procreate you can also do in Photoshop. So it actually also helps with that like learning curve when you go to upgrade to something in like Photoshop later on the line when you do become a professional level. It'll get you like 90% there. So if you're gonna go for an iPad, I recommend going with an iPad Pro if you can afford it, because it has more memory and space, and Procreate has been known to take up a lot of space and memory. It will actually even restrict the amount of layers that you can use in your file, which can be problematic. For me personally, I use a lot of layers. So having that extra storage space and extra memory and all that sort of stuff has been really helpful. I'm using a 2018 iPad Pro. It's the 11-inch version. I am gonna let you on a secret. I am super cheap. And I was really worried that I would not enjoy drawing on a tablet. I've been burned in the past with tablets and drawing programs when they just weren't at the same quality that they are now. Like it would lag or didn't have pressure sensitivity, or it was a really bad user experience. And so when I went to go use an iPad, I was really wary that I wasn't gonna like it. And so what I did is I just went and bought a refurbished iPad. So I think I got mine in 2020. I got an iPad that was about 2 years older than that, so I could get a used refurbished version, not spend as much money dropping it down in the bank, but still got a nice high quality tablet out of it. So if you're on that stage of you're a beginner artist, or you're gonna gift it to someone that's a beginner artist and you're not sure how committed they are, that might be a good route to go. The other route that you could go is just not do an Apple product. You can get, and I'm gonna recommend this based on what my followers recommended, because I put out a couple of polls on what people are using if they're not using an iPad with Procreate. And the number one recommendation that I got was Samsung Galaxy Tab and IBIS Paint. I have not used either of those, so I can't say from personal experience, but I can tell you that when I did that poll, like 90% of the responses said that's what they were using. So definitely I feel like it's safe to recommend it from that. When I asked my followers about Ibis Paint, they said that it was a pretty good dupe. When they saw tutorials for Procreate, they could do them in Ibis Paint, and it was interchangeable, so it should have most of the same functionality as well. And it's super cheap. They have a free version, or you can like pay a low amount of price to get rid of ads. So possibly a more affordable rate to get into being able to do digital art. A quick note on if you're going to be using an iPad, if you do go that route, you do need to get an Apple Pencil. And the reason you need to get an Apple Pencil, all right, I'm gonna try and show off this pen again because I felt like I didn't do that like fancy, there we go, it's an Apple Pencil. The reason why you have to go with an Apple Pencil is because, as I was talking about, pressure sensitivity is really important. And I tried getting a knockoff version and it didn't have pressure sensitivity. And I don't know that Apple, if anyone knows of a different pen that you can get, because these Apple Pencils are like $200. So if you know of another version, please share that. But as far as I can tell, you have to get the Apple Pencil if you go the iPad route.
This is an example of using the pressure sensitivity. So for example, I can draw here and I can press a little lighter and the brush gets thinner. I can also have it where if I change my settings, it becomes more opaque.
And if you go the Samsung Galaxy route, just make sure that whatever stylus that you get has the option to be able to use it for pressure sensitivity. Okay, so now I want to talk about the pros and cons of the beginner setup. So I actually use the beginner setup and the pro setup throughout my process. I sometimes get really fatigued sitting at a desk, like just creatively. It can be really difficult for me to stay at a desk all day. And having a tablet allows me to be able to draw from anywhere. I've drawn in my car. I often draw when I'm putting my kids down to sleep at night, just in the rocking chair as they go to bed, in the dark, on the couch, outside watching the rain. It's wonderful to be able to get around like a sort of a sketchbook, but I can go beyond just sketching and I can actually start painting, I can work on my books, etc. So that's the main thing that I really love about having it. Also, it's just a lot cheaper to get started. So just based on that alone is one of the reasons I really highly recommend it for beginners. The cons of a tablet are mainly the size. Like if you take a look at my Cintiq here versus the size of my tablet, you can tell that the Cintiq is a lot bigger. And I'll be talking about what the Cintiq is later when I talk about the pro setup. Sometimes it's really nice just to have a large screen. I can have a lot more information. I can have more references next to me, and that's really helpful. Plus, depending on how you draw, I know a lot of people that were trained as artists who try to use their shoulder to draw, which is good because it keeps you loose. It's a lot harder to do that on a tiny little tablet. So that's one of the cons of having a tablet. The other con, which I'm pretty sure doesn't apply just to me, is that I tend to get really terrible posture and posing when I work on a tablet, because I'll often work in a position where I'm just kind of like hunched over, or my legs up, or my knees are bent funny, or like that kind of thing, and especially like hunched over, which is really puts a lot of strain on my neck. Whereas when I'm working on a professional setup, I can set up so my back is straight, I'm looking straight at the screen, and I have my knees can be straight and that kind of thing. And as you get older, especially, but also just for your overall health, even when you're young, being able to keep that posture will prevent you from having pain in the parts of your body that you're using repetitively as an artist, which is one of the main reasons that if you decide to go pro, and this is going to be something, for example, that I was doing like 9 to 5, and then again, after I put my kids to bed from like 9 to 12, that's a lot of time to be sitting hunched over like this. So having a professional setup helps me have less pain and take better care of my body. All right, so now let's say that you're gonna go, instead of the tablet route for drawing, you're gonna still try and use your computer for drawing on as a beginner. You can still use Photoshop, and they have a plan which I think for Photoshop is $10 a month. I know that's still a bit expensive, but I think also Ibis Paint is available on the computer. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so there's sort of two things that you can get to work on the computer doing digital art. The first one is called a drawing tablet. The way those work is it's like a flat tablet that you draw on, but there's no image of what you're drawing there. So you're looking at the screen like this, and then you're drawing over here. That's what I used when I was a beginner because I didn't have anything more fancy than that. And it's honestly really hard, I felt, to work that way. And absolutely, I was never able to do sketching or concepting or anything without having the picture in front of me. Like looking down and looking at the screen was really disorienting at times. So I don't recommend that if you can afford the better option, which is some sort of a pen display. So a pen display can be something fancy like this, which is a Cintiq, where I can draw directly on the screen and see my painting. Or there can be ones that are a smaller version that you set down on your desktop that's connected to your computer. So they're kind of like, I think of it as a monitor. They're kind of like a monitor because they don't have like a computer program in them. So you have to connect it to a computer, but you can draw directly on that screen and bring your images over and work there. So it's just such a better way to draw than like drawing down here and looking at the screen, which can be really difficult, especially for a beginner. I feel like it's really a hard transition when you go that way. Sorry, one more thing. When it comes to drawing tablets, I don't use them anymore, but if I were to get one, I highly trust the Wacom brand. They've always had consistently good quality for me. If you go with another brand, I just can't recommend it. But if you're looking for something that I feel like you'd be confident, Wacom's a good way to go. So for the beginner setup, I recommend doing like an iPad, like I said, or a Samsung Galaxy Tab, something like that to draw on. You can get refurbished just to practice, make sure you like it. Procreate is a bit more, or Ibis Paint is a bit more user-friendly and easier to learn, whereas Photoshop can be really overwhelming for beginner artists. So even though you can have a beginner setup on a computer with a drawing tablet, as opposed to like a tablet like an iPad, those are two different things. You can, with a computer, you can use a pen display. The reason why I still recommend the iPad or the Samsung Galaxy Tab route for beginners is because Procreate and Ibis Paint are more user-friendly. Once you have, pretty sure that you want to go professional, the reason why you'll need to have a computer versus a tablet, especially if you're going to go into game design or animation or something where you're working on a team with other artists, you're going to need to use the same program that they're using. If you're just going to be doing children's illustration, it's not as important. But for those other industries, there is an industry standard of drawing programs that they use. And right now, I think Photoshop still is there. Also, as a first-time illustrator working in-house, I've had to use Adobe Illustrator and Adobe InDesign, and those are really not great programs. It's much easier, more time efficient on a computer. So if you wanted to work on your computer, let's say you're college, you're definitely gonna go and try to be pro, but you can't afford a Cintiq or something huge like this yet. I would probably go the computer route with a pen display, so it's a little bit cheaper still. You can draw on it, but you can learn Photoshop, anything else you need for school, and get up to the industry standards. And then once I'm professional and I'm working full-time and I'm getting paid, that is when I would, if you're ready to go for something like a gigantic Cintiq and just have like the really nice setup. But that's how I would transition it. That's how I would look at sort of those different time periods in your life of what you want to invest in. It is okay if you're a beginner, but you're really serious. If you want to go straight to a computer to learn Photoshop, just know that it is a bit of a learning curve. So just be aware of that. Okay, and that brings us pretty naturally into my professional setup, because for my professional setup, I do work with a computer with a Cintiq. Ooh, sorry. I work at a computer with a Cintiq. You can take a look at how large this baby is here. I think this is the 21UX. I got this thing 10 years ago. When I first got my job at Disney, I was able to get another person hired there, and I got a bonus, and it was the first thing I bought with my bonus. Back then, it was still like $2,000 to $3,000. And I'm pretty sure that's still what the prices are. So it is an expensive piece of equipment, and I do not recommend it for a beginner. This is really, once you're at the level of being professional, you want to be able to sit at your desk for long hours of the day, you want to have a large screen, you want to be able to work on Photoshop, all that, then I think it's worth the investment. And like I said earlier, I am super cheap, so I would absolutely not recommend it if I didn't feel like it was invaluable to me as a professional. I used to say, once you go Cintiq, you never go back, because it's just so nice to be able to, like I said, like have a huge screen, sit up straight, draw directly on the screen. It just makes my entire process as a professional illustrator so much more comfortable and so much easier. That I actually, like I said, I've had this thing for 10 years. I've had this thing for so long. It's finally time for me to upgrade, and I will, when I get another like sort of like bonus type thing, I'm setting aside money so that I can be able to replace it. And that's still for me a lot of money to put down, but I know that it will be worth it as a part of my process to be able to work on a screen like this. All right, so for my day-to-day work as a professional illustrator, like I mentioned, actually use both setups. I use my iPad so I can be mobile, and I use the Cintiq, but I especially use the iPad when I'm doing the more conceptual or creative part of my process, because I struggle to do that at a desk. There's something about being confined to a desk that just makes it really difficult for me. And then later, especially when I'm at the end of the process where I'm doing like the final touches, I need to export it, because Procreate, I believe, only does RGB, but for printing, you need to print in CMYK. So I'll do that in Photoshop and make those kind of edits there. And then the other pros of having a professional setup are Photoshop, for example, will save what I'm working on as I'm working on it. So if it suddenly crashes, I can come back to it. I've had a number of occasions Procreate crash and I couldn't come back to it, or I accidentally exited out and it's still in that one position. So it's a lot easier and a lot safer, I feel like, on my pro setup to make sure that my files are saved and don't get corrupted. And I can save multiple versions of it. I can have a pretty long history if I'm using Photoshop, so I can go back. There's also some functionality of Photoshop that Procreate still doesn't have. For example, in Photoshop, if I wanted to put a color layer over a group of images and like adjust all of those images at once, I could do that. But in Procreate, I can only do one layer at a time. I can't do it to a whole group. So that ends up making me sometimes just flatten things for my process. And I do not want to flatten things when I'm working professionally, because I want to be able to edit it really, really easily. So those are the other reasons why having Photoshop or the more professional setup is still recommended, in my opinion, once you get further along in your career. Also, text editing, super difficult in Procreate. And even in Photoshop, it's not great. So generally, if I'm at, not all illustrators do this, but since I'm trained in InDesign and Illustrator, I'll go there instead and not just rely on Procreate. At the end of the day, I still use my pro setup, but I use my beginner setup just to make my life a little bit easier. Okay, so the cons of the professional setup is just honestly the price. The price is a lot, and I understand that, which is why I don't recommend it for beginners. I recommend it once you've gotten established. Maybe for me, I did it once I have like my first sort of really big paycheck. I put it towards that. And you can, I'm not a tax professional, it's not tax advice, but keep in mind that this is a business expense, and you can possibly use it towards that as well, which helps. And then I've kind of already mentioned this, but the other con is I just don't like working at my desk all day. I feel like that was made really clear. And being stuck at my desk is not fun. If I did not also have an iPad, I would be using my sketchbook, but it's just frustrating because I like to paint, and it's a lot more difficult to paint in the dark in my kids' room while they're trying to sleep. Or honestly, just paint traditionally at all is really difficult when you have kids around that want to get into everything. So the iPad allows me to do that. I also even like do it in my car, like after I drop the kids off from school, I'll take a little time to like do some drawing or doodling or creative work before I feel like I have to go back home and get to actual work. If I do work in a sketchbook and I'm not using an iPad, I like to work really small. All right, so for example, I'm working on a Secret Garden little cover right now. This is the size that I work. It's very tiny. And what I'll do is I'll work in the super tiny size. I'll take a photo of it and then I'll just put it into Photoshop and make it bigger, or an iPad, and work that way. So if you still want to work and sketch with a sketchbook, just take a photo, import it, and then make your edits. It's really simple, and I love working that way. Oh, and then I forgot this one, but one of the other pros of the professional setup is that it lasts a really long time. For an iPad, I feel like I might get like a couple years out of it, but with a really strong computer and monitor, this is gonna last me 5 to 10 years. So it's more money up front, but in the long run, doing good. Oh, okay, so I'm also gonna mention this. I'm not a super technical person, so I might say something wrong. And to be honest, I rely on my husband who built my computer to answer these sort of questions. But a lot of times artists are wondering like what kind of computer do they need once you go to the pro setup, or even if just using a computer that you already have for the beginner setup. If you're gonna have a computer, like how much RAM and memory and whatever do you need? I cannot give precise amounts aside from just I honestly recommend once you're going to the pro level, get the best. Like just get the highest amount that you can of memory and storage space and graphics card. I think those are all 3 different things. And the reason is because, like I said, longevity is so important if it's your professional setup. And I got burned. I actually just recently changed back to having an actual computer as opposed to a laptop, because when you're using Photoshop or InDesign or Adobe Illustrator, these are huge programs and they take a ton of storage and space. And what would happen is I'd get a laptop and it would last a couple years and then back to buying another laptop again. And that's a huge expense every couple of years. So what I recently did is I had my husband help me and we ended up just buying the parts and building our own computer. That way, if I need to, I can just, swap out the new graphics card or memory card or whatever. So if you know how to do that, or you have someone handy in your life and you can do it, and otherwise, if you're going to be creating your professional setup, it's worth that investment to get the highest end that you can, because it's more expensive right now. But if you're a professional, you're gonna be doing this for hopefully 10, 20, 30 years, you'll get that money back in the long run. So if you think about it, if it's $1,000 right now to get the cheaper version, but you have to replace it every 3 years, you're gonna spend the same amount or even a bit more than if you just bought like the $2,000 version that will last you 5 years or 10 years. So that's from my own personal experience. I finally, after 10 years of doing this, realized, you know what, I just need to go ahead and buy the higher end when it comes to that and just bite the bullet, because in the long run, I am gonna be doing this forever. It's gonna be worth it. If you guys found this video helpful, I'd super appreciate it if you gave me a like or a subscribe for more content. When you do that, it actually lets the algorithm know that this was helpful and will hopefully show it to more people. And if you have any questions, please just comment them below. I will answer them or even follow up. And then I just want to take a second really fast and just thank the people on my Patreon, because honestly, this video I was able to do because of your support. I had been struggling to make YouTube videos because I don't have the time to edit them, and with the support from Patreon, I have hired an editor and she's amazing. So thanks to all of you guys for making it possible for me to do more of this stuff like that, and I will see you guys next time.